Now, last week in Brighton, Nick Clegg lived to fight another day. The Lib Dem party faithful are hardly ecstatic about being in bed with the Tories, but they held their noses and voted to stick with the coalition and their man, at least for now. But there may still be troubles ahead. Nick Clegg tried to rally the party faithful by promising them a brighter future, not as the third party, but as one of the three parties of government. But Mr Clegg is very much on probation. A recent survey of Lib Dem members showed major dissatisfaction with his leadership. The return of Paddy Ashdown to run the 2015 election campaign is a popular move and may well shore up Clegg's support. But what happens post-2015? Vince Cable gave us his predictions.
I don't believe, actually, that the British people will want to entrust their future to any one party next time. And if Britain wants sustainable growth, competence with compassion, fairness with freedom, and more equality, not ever greater division, then that government must have Liberal Democrats at its heart.
And does Vince believe he would be at the heart of the next government? Well, it's understood that the Business Secretary wouldn't mind being Chancellor should there be a coalition with Labour. And Lib Dem Health Minister Norman Lamb joins me now for the Sunday interview. Norman Lamb, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Let me show you what, you've probably seen it before, let me put up what the Shadow Health Minister, Andy Burnham, had to say. He said, if I'm Health Secretary after the next election, I will repeal the government's Health Act and I will restore the N in the NHS. Let's stick to the repealing the Health Act. And the reason I raise this is that at your conference, Vince Cable said we're heading for another hung parliament. And the poll suggests if we are, Labour will be the largest party. Now, if there was a coalition agreement, would you go along with the idea of repealing the Health Act?
I think it would be madness to do that. From my point of view, anyone who believes in the NHS and who wants to see a sustainable NHS dealing with really challenging problems of an ageing population should just be interested in making this work. I mean, to say repeal the Act effectively is telling the NHS we're going to go through another complete restructuring. It would be madness to do that.
Well, Mr Miliband, though, refined that because he and Mr Burnham seemed to be in some conflict yesterday because the Labour leader talked about not reversing everything that is in the changes. So what they're saying is that we'll repeal the bill because we don't like the principles it outlines, but there could be give and take on some of the changes. Could that be the basis of an agreement with Labour?
To be honest, I think this is rhetoric. Actually, the reforms are consistent with much of what Labour did in power. Labour accepted a role for the independent sector. This is on the basis that the patient always gets their care free at the point of need, but recognising that a number of different providers could play a role in that. That was Labour's policy. Labour's policy was also to devolve budgets to GPs. So this is very much consistent with the approach that they took, and to unravel all of that, to go through another complete restructuring would drive people in the service completely mad. Let's just make this work. And I think, you know, the focus needs to be on how we actually ensure that we manage care effectively, give patients high quality care when we have an ageing population, which means rising costs. Every health system has to deal with this, and the challenge is to improve care and to make the money go further.
But you were unhappy with a lot of the reforms to begin with. Andrew Lansley, the author of the reforms, has gone from the Health Department. I mean, are you looking at tweaking, refining, changing some of the plans that are coming down the pike?
I think, again, I come back to this point about implementation. We've just, you know, it's all very well passing an Act of Parliament, but the key thing is about how the service actually implements it. And one of the things that I was very pleased about through the listening exercise last year was that the government came down in favour of the concept of integrated care. Now, what does that mean? It means shaping services around the needs of the patient. And when you've got an ageing population, it's how you provide care to older people. So often at the moment, care for older people falls down. There's this ridiculous divide between social care provided by councils and health care provided by the NHS. From the patient's point of view, that's madness. So integrating, bringing it together. And we can see the future in places like Torbay, where they've got teams of health and care workers working together, and the whole focus is on how you keep people fitter, keep people out of hospital, and in that way you improve care but also reduce cost. That's the key to making this work.
Can I ask you a question about social care? The DILNOT report, the cost of these changes of improving our social care was about 1.7 billion. Do you agree with the Chancellor that the health budget should pick up that cost within the existing ring-fenced health budget?
Well, I have concerns about that. The health budget is expected to deliver, and this goes back to the Nicholson challenge, you may remember. This was something under the last Labour government where they said, because we have rising costs for the foreseeable future,
so you've got a lot of efficiencies
we have
to
to
make.
find efficiency.
But what about DILNOT? Could you absorb the costs of DILNOT into the health budget in a way the Treasury seems to want you to do?
Well, the point I'm making is that achieving those efficiencies is a big challenge. To do that as well as to implement DILNOT from the health budget is, I think, a big challenge. And so, look, let's have a proper, open discussion about this. I think reform of social care transcends narrow party politics. We should have discussions across the parties. Let's come up with a funding model that can deliver a reform of the system that is so long overdue.
Sounds like these discussions will have to be with your own Chancellor too. Let's come back to the health reforms. I see you laughing there. I like that. Here's you see, there's still unrest in your own party about these reforms. Here's Andrew George, a Liberal Democrat MP. This act, the act, not the bill, but the act that's now law, will cause the biggest upheaval in the NHS in its history. It runs the risk of creating an NHS which is driven more by private profit than by concern with patient care. Sounds like a fair chunk of your party wouldn't mind if you sat down with Labour and took off the Tory edges of these reforms.
Hang on, Andrew, you've moved from quoting one MP to saying the bulk of our party.
But he was, no, I said a chunk of your party, which is not, well, I don't know if it's the bulk. He wasn't on his own at Brighton on that attitude.
But I think the interesting thing is I spoke in endless fringe meetings at Brighton. It's wall-to-wall, health stuff at a conference. And I just didn't find this at all. What I found was a real determination. We've gone through this. We've gone through a trauma. Actually, the Lib Dems in government achieved very significant improvements to the bills. It went through Parliament. Now let's just make it work. And for anyone, I come back to this point, for anyone who cares about the NHS, who wants to see it sustainable, you have to recognise that reform is necessary, putting the patient at the heart, giving them real power. Let's just focus on that, and let's not go back to a rather sterile debate about public versus private.
All right. Finally, Mr. Clegg survived quite easily last week. There was no credible attempt on his leadership at all. But he's on probation. How long has he got until things start to turn round for him and your party?
Well, you know, I think the unspoken story of this coalition is the extent to which the Lib Dems, coming into government for the first time in the post-war period, have been disciplined throughout. We've stuck to the agreement. We've stepped up to the plate.
Sure, but how long has he got?
He's got through to the election.
If you stay behind UKIP in some of the polls?
The parliamentary party is united behind Nick. And I think, you know, people in time will see that he did the right thing for the country. Political stability is a priceless commodity in turbulent economic times. Nick Clegg has delivered that, and I think in time people will see it.
So even if you're way back in the polls and Mr. Clegg's personal ratings are in the dirt, he still takes you into 2015 election?
He's remarkably resilient, and you can leap around chasing opinion polls. That doesn't actually do you any good. Do the right thing for the country, and actually people might in time reward you.
Didn't work for Winston Churchill. Let's see if it works for you and Mr. Clegg.
Absolutely, I'm very confident.